All of you asked the simple question, or you've always said this, and I know a lot of you know this. I grew up in a little town called Bern, Indiana, which is named after Bern, Switzerland. The minority people that I grew up with were the Amish. So I probably know about as much about them as anybody could be. I mean, that was just the way it was. We lived with them, went to school with them until the 8th grade. They didn't go to school any further than that. So with that in mind, you ask yourself, and I ask myself, and many people ask themselves, who is the Amish? Well, the Clements have been up there to northern Indiana, and they have seen them. Hilliard, you've been up to Pennsylvania, and you've seen them. So there are people here who have seen them. To most of you, they are a curiosity. They are somebody that is unique, somebody that's very, very unusual, and you ask yourself, what in the world goes on with those people? Many, many years ago, 1965, I was at Purdue University up in Indiana, and I was at a education grant for the whole summer. One evening there was a play, and we went to see the play. The name of the play was Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. Well, that describes the Amish. Stop the world, I want to get off. These people literally stopped everything at a certain time in history. Now, I wrote some things down I'm going to have to read for a little while, and then after that I can go ahead and talk pretty fairly. If you look at 1 Timothy 6 through 9, this will give you a background to who the Amish and what is going on here. But godliness with contentment is great gain. Now I'm taking this from their point of view. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain that we carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be herewith content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which draw men into destruction and perdition. This is basically their philosophy of life. Then going into 1 John 2:15, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. That's very important to them too. And 2 Corinthians 6:17, wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. That also is very important to them. And then 1 Peter 2:9, but ye are a chosen, peculiar people. Some say chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people of his own, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. That to them is another very important thing. And then the 10th verse, who in time past were not a people, but are now the people of God. And then watch this in verse 11. Dearly beloved, I beseech you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul. Now, the reason I said that on pilgrims, if you look at them, they look like a pilgrim. If you look at a pilgrim, it looks like an Amish. The world stopped. It just literally stopped. And this was very important to them. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about the history of them, how they came about. There was a lot, during the time of the Reformation in Europe, there was a lot of interesting things beginning to happen. There was Calvin, there was Martin Luther, and many others. But there was a man by the name of Menno Simon who had a group of people who believed thusly. No baby should be baptized, because a person to be baptized has to confess. You cannot confess if you are a baby. I was so impressed the other day when I saw little Archie over there in England got christened. The word christened to them, he got baptized. I looked at that thing on TV and I thought to myself, little boy, what did you tell him? How did you confess? You see, a baby can't do that. And it says in the scripture that you must confess. Therefore, these people began to realize you can't baptize a baby. So they got to the point that they started baptizing adults, And so they got known as the Anabaptists. People who were anti a baby getting baptized. Now, what does that have to do with this whole thing? When you were born, what document was recorded down in the courthouse for you? Did you get a birth certificate? I have the joy and the pleasure, if I want to get one, I have to ride all the way to Lansing, Michigan, because I was born in Michigan. My parents lived there for 6 months, and I know nothing about it. But that's the only place I can get my birth certificate. But that is a legal document for me. Now, to them, when a baby was born, and at that time it was always Catholic, they went to the Catholic Church for the baptism, and at that moment they wrote their name down. When they wrote their name in the documentation of the church, they became a legal citizen of that country. So therefore, to get citizenship, to get a birth certificate, to get anything, you had to be baby baptized and recorded in the church. So if you don't get baptized as a baby and your parents allow you to grow up to be an adult, who are you? Get a handle on this now. You are the same thing. That's what's happening today with all these unregistered immigrants. And they want to put on the census form, are you a citizen or are you not? Well, this was the same question it was asking these people back there. Are you a citizen or are you not? And since there was no legal documentation, they were not citizens. So they were roaming around as people that didn't have a citizenship. Then there was something else that came about to them. These people got to believing very firmly, you do not go to war. You do not go around with a gun in your hip and bang, 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 try to level everything off just because you're mad. You don't go to war, you just don't fight. What did Jesus say? If somebody slaps you over here, turn this and slap that side? And what did he do when he was being tried? He just stood there and let them torment him and punish him and flog him and everything else. These people will not go to war. They are conscientious objectors through and through. Now I say this with all humility, the last person I remember out of this congregation to ever talk in that vein was Howard Jones. I've never heard anybody anymore say anything hardly about that. But he had some leanings earlier in his life of a conviction, of a thought in concerning going to war in relationship to that. Now, when you got married, there's two things you had to do. You had to, number one, you had to put your military uniform on to prove that you were a citizen and that you were willing to defend your country. And then you had to show up for your marriage. Now, what are you going to do if you won't go into the military? Now, logically, a lot of these people live in Switzerland, and I don't know if you know this or not, but even to this day, from the time you're 18 years old until you're 65, you've got to serve in the National Guard. That's a mandate. Everybody has their guns at home. I mean, they've got an arsenal in every single home in all of Switzerland. Even Hitler wouldn't attempt to try to get after them. Of course, Hitler had another problem. He wouldn't go ahead and strike Switzerland either. He had all his money hidden in Switzerland in the banks. So it's a dual thing. But if you can't show up in a uniform, you can't legally get married in the church, and you don't have a citizenship, what happens to those children that are born now? You've got a problem on your hands. So these people were being persecuted. Now, about this time, there's another group of people, and these are Mennonites also, but there was a man by the name of Ammon who comes along, and he says, you Mennonites have got a problem. You still got some people who are going down to the drinking hole and drinking. You still got some people that are down there carousing. You still got some people that are living immoral. Why don't you have a church trial and shun them and put them out of the church? And the Mennonites would look and says, you're not supposed to get into that. You're supposed to love them and bring them back and tenderly bring them back into the fold. So they got into a big argument, and these people, following Mr. Ammon, got out of the Mennonite church and got known as the people who followed the Ammonite, the Amish, and so you get a split. At that very moment, they froze everything in time. They said you have to be different, You have to look different. You have to act different. And so they were different. Now what happens to the society? Society hates these people. Most of these people dress today the way the monks and the nuns used to dress about that time in history. In fact, if you would see some old monks or nuns in some of these nunneries or these monasteries, they still look almost exactly like an Amish. There's just hardly any difference at all. So you can identify them by the way they dress and how they look. But these people then couldn't buy land because they weren't a citizen. They were punished. They had to be pushed higher and higher and higher into the mountains. And the higher they went up into the mountains, the harder it was to farm. And it just got to be a catastrophe. They couldn't support their families because, well, I'm going to say it. They did not practice birth control. They didn't know about a rhythm method. They didn't know about anything, and children were coming fast and furious. And you had children to support, and you had to have food to put on the table. You had to take care of them, and you don't have any way of doing it. What are you going to do? And then somebody said about a man called William Penn that had a great big lot of land that was given to them by the King of England called what we call today Pennsylvania. And so in 1620, a large group of them who had already moved out in 1620 when they split from the Mennonites, now in about 1760, they came to America. They settled in Pennsylvania, and that's where you get the Pennsylvania Dutch, the people that live up there. Then, of course, as they began to farm, they needed more land because they had bigger families. As the farms began to get bigger and bigger, the people had to move and move. Some of them started coming into Ohio, and you got settlements in Ohio. Some of them started coming into Indiana, and that's where they came to the same community that my relatives came from, because the little town of Bern, Indiana, this is interesting, but my ancestors being Mennonites and being Anabaptists also were being persecuted, and as they got pushed higher into the mountains, there were 5 families, of which the Neuenschwanders were one of them, migrated to Ohio, and somebody told them, if you go across the state line, you can settle in some federal ground and become a homesteader. They went over there, and you know what they found? A great big swamp. And you know what they said? This is heaven, there's no mountains here. And they began to drain the swamps. Have you ever heard of the Limberlost? There's stories about a woman who wrote The Girl of the Limberlost. Well, this is in the swamp. That's just within about 5-10 miles of where I grew up all my life. But they drained the swamp and they became farmers. Now these farmers are very, very unique, and they're very, very individual. They're very, very hard-working people. Now I'm going to share something with you. I don't have all this fancy stuff. I'm not an electronic thing. I live in the dark ages, and that's the way I am. I have got my notes here, and if anyone wants to come up and challenge me and look at them later, every red dot part on there is a scripture that backs up what I'm saying. But if I start telling you all this and quoting everything else, we'll be here till doomsday and you'll all fall asleep. So we're not going to get into all of that. But these people, the Amish, became a unique bunch of people who are hard-working farmers. If you go up there and look at one of their farms today, you will not find a weed. You won't find a blade of grass going the wrong way. You won't find anything anywhere that they can control that isn't exactly right. And you look at that and you say, I can't understand this. Well, how do they farm? They have horses. They have big mules that pull their equipment. They will not, this is the core to all their belief on this. They will not accept anything of a power outside of themselves. So therefore, what are you not allowed to have? You can't have any bottled gas. You can't have any electricity. You can't have any phone. Oh, young people, there's no cell phones either. I mean, people live by them today. I see people walk around, I think we're going to go blind. And they bump into everything all the time, but they have none of this, except a few of them who are in business. And if they are in business and they get the official word from a bishop, they can do this. You see, every one of them are controlled, or they have a bishop that rules over them. This bishop is what we'd call like our preacher. They don't have a group of elders, just that one person. Now, their church is composed, I'm backing up a little bit from this farming business, but their church is composed of 75 adult members. When they get over that, they're too big. And there's a reason for that, which I'll share later. So they split. And finally, when they split, then they have to go and find more land. It just keeps on going on and on and on and on as far as they're concerned. But back to this idea of the farming. Everything is done by great big mules. If you see those things, they're huge big things. You ever see a Clydesdale horse? They're as big as those things. They're big things. So logically, you have to have a blacksmith because he's got to put the shoes on these horses. So you have a blacksmith in the community, you have all these mules, and you go around and you see them pulling old, ancient, I don't know how they keep those things going, but the welding shop does a good job because they break them down and they have to fix them all the time. But every single thing you can think about, as far as mechanical, it's all going to be pulled by an animal or a human being. Now, for their transportation, they have buggies. Now, this is a real interesting thing because this morning, a whole bunch of us went to Hyundai. We went through and saw how the cars are made. And I kept thinking all the time, because of studying this lesson, can I imagine a buggy being made the way those things are made? A wheel comes down here, and a door comes down here, and a hood comes down here, and an engine comes down, and bam, 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 bam. Put it in there and drive it out the way, and away it goes. They make these buggies by hand. Now, there's a couple of things that I need to share with you. Every bishop has told you they live under a bishop. He makes the rules for that group of 75 people. If he says you cannot have a roof on your buggy, there is no roof. If he says you may have a roof on your buggy, then they can have a roof. If he says you can have a door on the side, you can have a door. But if he says it has to be a roof but no doors, then that's the way you're going to have it for that group of 75 adults. He controls every single thing of their life. It goes on and it stays that way. And so you have these buggies. I don't know if any of you have ever gone up to Dollywood. It's not there anymore, but they used to have a buggy making shop there that you could stand and watch and see those buggies made. And I've been there many times and watched that. And of course, I've seen the buggies made when I was young, because they have the seat on there. They have a little box that they sit in. By the way, do you remember when Henry Ford made the first Ford, what color you could buy them in? Yeah, you could have any color you want as long as it's black. Well, that's the way the Amish are. You can have any color you want as long as you have black. And they also have to have 16 spokes in every wheel. No deviation. That's the way it is. If I tell you what to do, that's the way you're going to make it. And so they sit in these things and they ride. Now, that's summer, no air conditioning. That's winter, no heater. They will wrap up in blankets like you can't believe it. They don't take clothes off to get cool. They keep their clothes on all the time. And when it's hot, that's just the way it is. If they have a covered wagon, then they're allowed to have that. Now, the government has stepped in. There are several things that the government has done up in these states and these communities. They made a path on the side for the Amish to go on. They mandate that all of them have a triangle on the back of their buggy so they can be seen. Some of the places have told them they have to have tail lights, so they have to buy a battery. Then they got the problem, how do you get your battery charged? So they have to go out and buy a gasoline generator that you put the gas in, and it has to have with a pull starter. You can't have a key on it, you have to have a pull starter. So they have to charge your battery, you have to put it back in there. You see, it just goes on and on and on and on, just to go from here to town. Now, you're also allowed to ride a bicycle. And a lot of the older ones will have a three-wheel bicycle, and if you go up there, you'll see them just riding along, all dressed up in their clothing. Now, I told you something else about them in dressing. They have these strange dress, these strange clothing, based on way back when. It never changed. They have no buttons. No buttons anywhere. It's all hook and eyes. A button is something of the devil. And they will not tolerate that. The women have long dresses. Every single one of them has an apron on. Why? Because if you look when Adam and Eve were in the garden, they got put out of the garden, they put on a leaf. As they interpret that, they started wearing an apron when they saw sin in the world. So a woman has to keep wearing an apron, and she wears it all the time. She also has to have a crest that's made out of white material that goes over the front of her. These are just symbols that it doesn't change. It just never changes. Now, some of them have gotten a little on the modern side and will buy a very, very dark blue or a dark purple or a very dark green or dark maroon or maybe a brown. Boy, you're being daring if you do that. But there are a few of them that have done that. Now, the man has black pants. Now, gentlemen, you just stop to think of this. Do any of you know what a navy pants looks like? Do you know how the front opens up? Has buttons up the side and over across the old ones? Well, you can imagine when you go to the bathroom, you got to go through all those buttons to open it up. But that's the way they are. They don't have zippers. They don't have well, I shouldn't say buttons. They have hooks and eyes all the way through this whole thing. They wear a hat that has 3-inch brim on it. By the way, when they get a haircut, they take a bowl, put it down. They can't get to me. They put a bowl on top of their head, and where the bowl is, they cut that just around there. And so it looks like a bowl when the haircut is done. Young men do not wear beards. Once you get married, you wear a beard. Every married man must wear a beard. But something you never notice, unless you know this, they don't wear mustaches. They're not allowed to have a mustache. So they have a beard. Now, a young boy will have a nice hat, and when he's out looking for a girl, he's going to take little pieces of paper like a ticket or a feather and stick it in his hat. And when you see a boy like that, it means, I'm available, I'm looking, any girl, anywhere, anyway. Now, what does a girl do? She does nothing. But the parents may put a blue curtain in her room. And it's only a one curtain thing that pulls over to one side. Or they may paint one of the doors or the gate blue, which means we got a girl, a daughter that's ready to get married. What do they do for a marriage ceremony? Well, I was able to find that. It's kind of interesting. Weddings only take place on Tuesday and Thursdays in November. And they start at 8:30 in the morning. That's just the way it is. That's the rule. They have a long sermon to tell them what to do. There could be from 50 to 1,000 people show up at the bride's house, and they are going to have to feed them at the middle of this thing. The question is this: can you both confess and believe that God has ordained marriage to be a union between one man and one wife? Do you also have the confidence that you are approaching marriage in accordance with the way you have been taught? Notice that. The way you have been taught. All these things I've been telling you is what they've been taught. It doesn't say anything about the Bible, just the way you've been taught. Are you going to live that way? They're supposed to answer yes. Do you also have the confidence, brother, that the Lord has provided this, our sister, as a marriage partner for you? And he's going to answer yes. And then do you also have the confidence, sister, that the Lord has provided this, our brother, as a marriage partner for you? And she answers yes. Do you also promise your wife that if she should be in body weakness, sickness, or any similar circumstances need of your help, that you will care for her as if fitting for a Christian husband? And she'll answer yes. Do you promise your husband the same thing, that if he should in bodily weakness, sickness, or any similar circumstances need the help, that you will care for him as fitting for a Christian wife? And she will answer yes. Now, do you both promise together that you will live with love, forbearance, and patience, live with each other, and not part from each other, until God will separate you in death? And again, they're going to answer yes. And then after the prayer, they don't kiss, but the bishop will take the hand of the man, and he'll take the hand of the woman, and put her hand in his hand. And then they will be pronounced that they are husband and wife. The wedding ceremony being over, they will all get together either in the barn or in the house, and they will eat a meal like you can't believe. I still get my hometown newspaper, and there's an Amish woman called Lavina that writes in there every couple weeks, and Becky loves reading those articles too, but they had one recently about a daughter that got married, and the food that they consumed, it was beyond your belief. I mean, Ted, you couldn't furnish enough food for them in one meal like they furnish for these meals. It's beyond belief. Then in the afternoon, they will open gifts, and they will play some games, and the kids will go out and do everything else. Then they eat up the leftovers, and then comes the boarding. Anybody know what boarding is? Okay. They open up the door to the upstairs, put the couple up there in bed, and put a big board between. And then there is dead silence all over downstairs. When the board comes out, everybody starts singing and everybody starts partying. The marriage has been consummated. I see, this is another one of their traditions. It's another one of the things they tell them they're going to do. Now, before this happens, there can be some courting going on. No couple is ever allowed to be left alone. They are always chaperoned. And if you're going any place, you will go to the relatives to visit with the relatives. And there will be reports get back that you have been to such and such a house from such and such a time to such and such a time. And they know how long times it gets from one to the other, and you would have been in another house. But there's always one of the young kids or adult is always with them, no matter where they go. Except for one variation. Every spring, they have what they call a bash. Now everybody that is not an Amish, to them is called an English. We English kids always wanted to find out why that was, and we had our ears to the ground at all times because we wanted to crash that thing and watch it and see what goes on. But we never could. And the police, the sheriff, was always out to find out where it was. It was usually in a barn, and when they send them in there, they didn't care what happened. They would basically furnish liquor to them and half get them drunk. If a girl got pregnant, they had a marriage, and that's what they wanted. See, this is another tradition. It's just tradition. Now, they do not want the family to be small. They want them to be big. A child is also mandated that you must take care of your parents when they get old. You don't put them in these nursing homes. You don't put them in a care place. You take care of them. You will build a little tiny house called, in English, it'd be a grandfather house, grandmother house, or grandparent house, right next to yours, and that's where they will live. And you will care for them until the time of their death. At death, the casket is made out of wood by the Amish. They don't go down and buy it at the funeral home. They do have the body embalmed. They take it to the house, and the funeral is in the house. Then they take it to a cemetery, and there are no markers. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. No markers. You are not to go back to the cemetery and linger over your parents or relatives. You are not to do this because their great philosophy at the end of all time is this: it's God's will. Now stop it. No more. You don't linger, you don't labor, you don't mourn, you don't moan, you don't groan. It's God's will. Stop it right now and just go on with life. That's the eternal way that they keep on living. What's interesting is, just the other day when I got my hometown paper, there was 2 Amish death certificates in here. I thought that was kind of interesting. This one here had 9 children, 73 grandchildren, 99 great-grandchildren. This other one here had 9 children, 62 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. He died at an early age. You see, the families are big. Now, if you understand this, you begin to see why some place like Eastern Meadows Church of Christ can't keep their kids there. You can't find enough farming land so you have to move. So those people move from Indiana into Illinois. They moved up to Kansas. They're moving all over. They're going up into Canada. They're going down to Argentina. They're spreading all over. And I did some research and discovered that there's a small group that is now settled over here by Fawnsdale. And I didn't know that. Now, I don't know, I've never been over there to find them, but in the general area of G Bend, yes? Yes. Yeah. And somewhere in the area of Dawson, Georgia, there's some in that area too. In fact, there's a Mennonite church out there somewhere along the road. But they normally don't go to a church building. That's another thing. Because houses are not made with hands where you worship God. God is inside of you. Therefore, they worship in the house. Now, how do they do this? They only have church service every other Sunday. It gets just to be too big to go ahead and do it every Sunday. So everybody has to take their turn having it at their house. When the time comes to have it at their house, you're going to feed them also. Ted, you'd have a big thing there coming up too with all that. I mean, when I think of the food they put in when you have everybody over here, just imagine if every one of you had to do that at least one time a year or whenever it come around to you, be your turn. And all these people are going to show up. There's 75 adults and all the kids and everybody else. Now, how do they handle this? Well, they have what they call a church buggy. It's a great big wagon that has all the benches in it. Oh, by the way, there's no backs on it. There's no padding on it either. Just flat seats. They haul these to the house that they're going to have it. Then they also have what they call a food buggy, which has everything in there, including the dishes and the silverware and everything they're going to be needing to feed the people. So these wagons are hauled from house to house as they get ready for church. And when the church gets ready to have it, the men are on one side and the women are on the other side. They are not together. Now, the women will have a white bonnet on her head at all times, even in the house, no matter where she is. When she goes out, after she's married, she'll have a black, bigger bonnet that goes over the little bonnet that she'll wear at all times. And the man has his great big hat, as I said, with a 3-inch brim. They measure these things. They make them this way. A couple of years ago, we were up at Shipshewana, Indiana, which Paul and Gladys Clements were up there the other year. In fact, she was talking to me about it. And they had a little mannequin sitting in there with a personal men's suit that was tailor-made, and it was over $700 for that tailor-made suit. So they got money somewhere. They're doing something right. But most of the time, the women will make all the clothes, including the boys' clothes, the men's clothes. I mean, you're sewing this, remember, on a treadle sewing machine because there's no electricity. You women think you have it bad, and we men, we think we have it bad. Oh, not what they do. But they're happy. They're happy as can be. I don't know if you remember this or not, but several years ago, there was a kid that went into an Amish schoolhouse, shot and killed, what was it, 7 or 11 kids in that shooting. Bang, 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 bang. Immediately the next day, the parents of all these got food together and took it over to the boy's parents' house and sat down with the boy's parents, telling them that we hold no grudges. This was God's will. There's a book been written about it. I've read the thing and I've given it to somebody. I don't know who's got it. I know Tish read it one time. But it tells about how they forgive and how they forget and how they go on. Now, ironically, this interesting thing about all this is Alexander Campbell studied them deeply. And many of the things that they had in their church, he saw a value to. He saw the value that you do not baptize babies. He saw the value to it that you do not sing with musical instruments. The Amish sing in a Gregorian chant. They have 2 books that they use with no notes in it, and they understand how to do it, but they drag it out real slow, and it just goes into a chant. I can't sing, so I wouldn't even try. If I did that, you'd be out of here in a hurry. I one time told the elders if they ever put me up here to lead singing, I'll turn into Lot's wife. I'll be a pillar of salt. That'd be the end of me. I can't pitch a tune, I can't find it, and I don't know where the tunes are. You people find them out of a bucket and you can use them, but I can't find them. But these people all sing a cappella style. Like I said, the man on the one side and the women on the other side. But they have a lot of other things that are still very, very peculiar. How often do we take the Lord's Supper? Every Sunday. How do they do it? Twice a year. They do it in the middle of the year and the first Sunday of the year. Now here's the real kicker to them that's really something else. The Sunday before this, when they have the first Sunday service before a communion service, they have what they call a inner examination of self and a confession, and go around to each other and I did you wrong, I did you wrong. They get everything cleaned up between the brothers and sisters in the church until they are totally right. And if they don't do this, they will not get communion the next Sunday when it's done. And so they call that Confession Sunday. They have that each time before they do the actual Lord's Supper. Some of the other things that I think are very, very interesting, they're schools. They do not go to school after the 8th grade. You know what Paul was told one time, much learning makes you crazy? Well, they believe that. They believe that nobody should go to school beyond 8th grade as long as you learn your reading, writing, and arithmetic. How do they do this? Monday you come to school and you practice reading. German in the morning, English in the afternoon. Why? Because all their Bibles are in German. All of their sermons in the church are in German. You have to know the German language to be able to be an Amish. So you have to do that. That's on Monday. On Tuesday, you may have history. You may have reading another day. You may have math another day. You'll have arts and crafts and something else another day. Each day is a separate total thing from beginning to end. Now why? You have a one-room school. You have kids from first grade through 8th grade. How much education is the 8th grader getting? Very little, because he's down here helping as a teacher's aide, helping the little kids. But that's just the way it is. And when they get to the 8th grade, they graduate. Now what do? They go home, and the girls learn to cook, they learn to sew, they learn to take care of the house, they learn to do everything else, and the boys learn how to farm. And by the end of the time that a person would graduate, they have a total vocational education. They know how to have a career, they know how to take care of everything, they know how to manage, they're ready to go. And of course, then the parents want them married. Get out of the house, it's time to go. We got other kids coming along. What do they do for a bath? They have no running water, remember this. If you go out here to Sweet Creek, what do they have out there on the side? A great big windmill. The only thing is that windmill doesn't work. The ones they have goes down into the ground, and it actually pumps the water up. That's the only way they get the water, and they have to carry it into the house. So they put a great big tub there. Daddy takes the first bath, Mama takes the second bath, or else they'll start with the little kids and put the little kid in there, then the next kid, the next kid, the next kid, and Daddy could be the last one, depending on how the house wants to do it. But they use the same water because they just can't keep on doing this. And by the time you put hot water in there, by the time the last person is, it's all cold. In the wintertime, we used to always say they never changed their clothes. We always said they just kept them on, and we always go around, when we saw one of them, we'd go out like this. Now, if you do anything to tease an Amish says, you're clapping. That's a bad term. If they say you're clapping, that means you're tormenting them. Now, the ugliest thing we used to do, and there was a reason behind this, one of the 10 Commandments says, you will not make an image like unto myself. Therefore, man is made in the image of God, so you are godlike. Therefore, you cannot take a picture of you. You will not have a picture anywhere of you. Even the dolls have a blank face on them. So when we boys were growing up, we'd sit along the side of the road. We'd have a camera in our hand. We didn't care if there was a film in it. All we'd do is want to see the Amish come along, and then we'd run. Boy, would we run. That would just irritate them no end. Sometimes we'd see them in a park, they were having a picnic. You try to get a picture. Don't ask me how they do this, but they can see and they can smell that camera 10 miles away, and they can disappear. One time we were going up north, and Becky said, I want a picture of this Amish. There's a school there, can we get it? I said, Becky, you'll never get it. We stopped along the road, she got the camera out, and just she get ready to snap it, every kid just, boom, just dropped. I don't know how in the world they understand that. Now, why do we share all this? When this is called a sect, what's the problem here? How much of what I told you is Bible-centered? What do we have here? We have the traditions of man. And what did Jesus say over and over and over? Do not follow the traditions of man. It's in the Bible. Where the Bible speaks, we speak, and where the Bible is silent, we're silent. Why do you keep on putting these things? You know, it tells us in Revelation, if you add to it or take away, there's punishment coming. Even Deuteronomy, it tells us this. You don't change these things. And this is the thing that Campbell saw when he was studying them. There were some things that the Amish have that's good, but there's some things they've gone way beyond the whole thing. If you were told every time to dress the way they do, if you were told your kids can't go to college, they can't go to high school, if you were told you had to live this way, this isn't the way to do it. So why do we call it a sect? Because they're following traditions of man. There's so many traditions that it just gets mind-boggling. And it just goes on and on and on. The bells have rung. I share this with you. If any of you are interested, I've got a couple pictures here that I did for fun. Here's one of an Amish buggy. Here's another of an Amish couple. Now, I disobeyed their law, and I made a picture of them. But it's not a picture of anybody I know. I had to make it up. And if they saw that, they would crumple that thing up in a hurry. So if you're interested in one of those, till they're out, they're out. I think they're coming. I appreciate talking with you. I appreciate sharing this. I hope you know something more about it. And for fun, sometime when you want a vacation, go up there and visit them.